shed more light on the associated challenges and opportunities and really build the business case behind 5G. We have with us the head of broadband and IoT business area networks at Ericsson. Please join me in welcoming Marie Hogan.
So, good morning all. I am very happy to be here in New Delhi to talk about enabling 5G for India. So I thought I would start with looking at a couple of the big trends that we see in the global market today. We see, as the previous speakers have referenced, of course, a huge growth in traffic. We've seen that for the last few years, and we don't see any sign of this stopping. So we expect to see a continued growth. Right now, we're looking at 40% more traffic per site year on year, on average. We're looking at, more or less a doubling of the traffic every year, every second year. Why? Why do we see this growth? I mean, we see a huge number of increases in subscriptions in mobiles and in mobile broadband continuing. We see new services coming along. So things like IoT that have been referred to already. We see a massive increase in the number of devices that are going to be connected in the networks. We see, as of 2017, something like 0.7 billion cellular IoT devices connected already globally. By 2023, we expect that to rise to something like 3.5 billion. So that's a lot of devices. We see nationwide services like public health and safety, for example, and we see the biggest driver right now, and even up to 2023, being video. And what's interesting about that is that we see a drive both in the uplink and in the downlink direction. Previously, we've worked a lot with data downloads, but now we need to work also in the uploads. So a massive increase that's continuing. We could say also a trigger that's matched with 5G is the accessibility now that's starting to become available for new spectrum. So bands that LTE and 2G, 3G don't operate in today. So we talk about the upper mid bands, so sub 5 gigahertz, but above maybe 2.5 gigahertz. There's spectrum started to come available globally and be licensed for 5G. And we see the millimeter wave bands, so already bands like 28 gigahertz and 39 gigahertz start to become available. And although the coverage may be not the same as you would get on lower bands, sub 1 gigahertz, you get a huge amount of capacity. So those are very wide bands. You can have up to 800 megahertz of spectrum, for example, in the millimeter wave bands, which is a lot of data throughput. We see also a global acceleration of 5G. I think in Ericsson, when we started working with 5G, that was probably back in 2013, 14, and we've been working on standardization and test beds, proof of concept since then. But we would have expected the trigger to be really 2020. But about 2 years ago, an acceleration started. So we will see limited but commercial rollouts already in parts of the globe this year. And while we might be waiting till 2020 for mass rollouts, we see a significant acceleration and a growing interest in 5G, obviously as evidenced here today. So if we look a little bit more on the data growth aspect, 5G traffic, we expect in 2023 that the traffic in the networks will have grown by 8 times. And although we don't have 5G traffic today, by 2023 globally, we would expect that the 5G traffic alone is more than 1.5 times the traffic you see in existing 4G networks today. So that's a significant growth. We would expect the bulk of that traffic in that time frame, about 75%, to be driven by video. And how do you deal with all this capacity growth? The obvious solution today is to continue to build out LTE networks for capacity, spectrum optimization, etc. But the investments you make today to do that, of course, need to be future-proof for tomorrow. So equipment that's deployed today should be capable of handling 5G in the not-too-distant future. 5G brings a lot of opportunities. So if you want to talk about expanding the capabilities of the networks of today beyond to the 5G of the future, we can look from your left-hand side, and we see use cases like massive IoT already being rolled out in the 4G networks. We see mobile broadband, which will continue to be supported and evolved for 5G. But on the far side of this picture, you can see the type of use cases that really only 5G can support. Use cases that would demand extreme low latency, extreme reliability, high availability, maybe not all in the same use case, but potentially in some cases, yes. So we've heard about robotic surgery, we hear about wireless manufacturing, those type of use cases you can start with already now in 4G, and then once the 5G technology starts to be rolled out, you can get the complete suite of functionality that's needed for these new types of business. What would be the incentive to move to these new use cases in the telecoms world? So we see today's type of services are starting to slow in the increase of compound annual growth rates. So a growth rate of about 1.5% is what we see today. But these new services that you can access in the so-called verticals, we see a potential revenue of about 36% increase. So that's about 619 billion US dollars. You can see there's a footnote on this slide talking about the potential revenue opportunities that would mean for India, which is about $13 billion. And we see primarily the points of interest with the most opportunity on a global basis would be manufacturing and energy and utilities. But you can see there's a whole swathe of options here for new use cases. If you want to hear about more details, the Ericsson booth outside has quite a few more details in the background to these business cases. Of course, there are challenges to move to these new verticals and to start to roll out 5G. You need to keep pushing your networks of today, evolving with the capacity and not disturb your existing capabilities and existing use cases for mobile broadband. You need to start deploying and building out those networks, but you would like to have equipment, of course, that's future-proof for 5G. And you need to start building new use cases, new business models, etc. And these networks need to be flexible. LTE was all about connecting people and connecting people to things. 5G is primarily about connecting things. So machine-to-machine optimization is the ultimate use case for 5G, and about improving the flexibility and the capability of people to things and people to people. So how can we help in Ericsson? So as I mentioned, we've been driving 5G studies, proof of concepts, test beds for quite a number of years now. But now the reality starts to come. So we would expect by Q4 this year, 2018, that there will be globally some commercial launches in 5G. That would be commercial hardware, commercial software, and some limited devices, probably pocket routers and some type of CPE devices. And those would be 3GPP compliant, so you will have a global ecosystem starting to form from a commercial point of view at the end of this year. We have a number of commercially announced deals, but what's of real interest here, particularly I think in the context of India, which is not the same as US, is not the same as Europe. Every country and every region is different, of course. So I think what's really important now is the number of collaborations we have locally and with industries and with universities to build those use cases. I think some earlier speakers said, if you build it, they will come. I think when we started with LTE 10 years ago, we, including Ericsson, asked ourselves, well, who's going to need 100 megabits per second? And now we're showing 2 gigabits per second per user in the LTE networks. So 5G has a lot of technology, but we need to decide on the use cases per region that are the most appropriate, and that will bring the right revenue. Lots of things happening recently. Just to mention one or two in the last few months, we had the first commercial call on millimeter wave in the US last week with Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T, together with our partners Qualcomm and Intel. That was on millimeter wave spectrum, 39 gigahertz. We also had, in July, commercial data over the air in 3.5 spectrum with our partners there as well. And Docomo, for example, to take another aspect, we've demonstrated in-glass antennas on cars moving at 100 kilometers per hour. So lots of different things happening. Last but definitely not least, here in India, we've opened a 5G Centre of Excellence. You can see in the picture here, your esteemed Minister for Telecoms and our CEO from Ericsson, opening that 5G Centre of Excellence to focus on the use cases that are really of interest and of use to India. So in addition, we build out networks, as you know, in Ericsson, and we have built since 2015 the hardware, the base stations, the radios that can be software upgradable to 5G. So you can roll out equipment now, or for the last few years, that's just software upgradable for 5G. We've also added things like flexible processing, so you can tailor software to move to different parts of the network depending on the use case, higher latency, lower latency, pooling resources, etc. So if I summarize then, enabling 5G for India, need to address the ever-growing data increase that the networks are pushing. We need to build out 4G to handle that capacity demand, and we need to make that equipment 5G ready and work on those 5G use cases and 5G business opportunities for enabling 5G for the India of the future. Thank you.